What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and boy, do we have a special guest. Marga Hoek is in the house. What's up, Marga?
Hi, nice to be with you here, Darius.
Oh my gosh. Well, good evening to you. It's like, what is it, like 6 or 7 at night your time? Maybe I'm even early there. Is it dinner time?
It was already a long day.
Well, I'll be your nightcap.
Oh, that sounds good. So you may have to make it fun, huh? This time of the day, I deserve some fun.
I was yesterday. I don't know. Have you heard of the book Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Gillard?
I have heard. I haven't read it.
So I interviewed him yesterday, and he was sick. He has a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old, and he was like kind of had the sniffles. And at the end of the show, I said, "So what'd you think?" He's like, "Man, I was not feeling good, but you have a lot of energy, Darius." And I was like, "All right, well, that's what I'm here for."
Well done.
So I'm gonna be like a double espresso before you go to bed.
Oh,
so
great. Fine. Also.
Perfect. Hey, do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get started?
Oh, go ahead.
Perfect. Well, hey, for listeners who are new to the show, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things: people living their passions and those creating greatness in the world and doing so despite the odds. And Marga here is neither short of passion or greatness. So I stumbled upon Marga online. And as you all know, I'm a conscious capitalist. I'm all about that we can do great by doing good. And I saw that, she has a slogan that she coined, business for good. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I started digging in more and more. And I'm like, I want to meet this person. And as you all know, this is my favorite way to meet amazing humans, is leveraging the show. And so here we are. We asked her to come on the show. She was so gracious to get her team to get involved and to come on the show. And just very grateful to have you here, Marga. Thank you for coming on the show.
Sure. And it's great to hear that you did some background research, huh?
I always want to make sure that you're not going to come on here and do bad. So lots of doing good going on. So for those of you that are not familiar with Marga, she's a 3-time CEO and chair, a board member as well, recognized by Thinkers 50 for her global management thinking. She coined the slogan "Business for Good" in 2014 and has written some award-winning books: New Economy Business, The $1 Trillion Shift, and we're here to talk actually about her new book, Tech for Good: Imagine Solving the World's Greatest Challenges, which comes out on November 29th of this year. But before we go there, Marga, I would love if you wouldn't mind giving our audience a little bit of your origin story. How did you get to where you got to? I know you didn't just wake up and start CEOing and winning awards and coining slogans, but yeah, if you don't mind, give us some of your background.
Yeah. So originally I was a 3-time CEO. I always had an eagerness to lead a company, to have a vision, and then to have leadership and take people along to achieve something good. And those CEO roles were in and around real estate, construction sector, and all that. And you could say that was, if you will, the first phase of my professional life. And in that role, it struck me that, you employ quite a lot of people. You create buildings that hopefully are there to last for a while. And then often they look terrible, or they're actually not good for the surroundings, or not good for the people, or they're made by all kinds of people outside their company walls. And then I got so inspired and motivated to think, how can I do that differently? I want to really innovate this sector, starting with my own company. And so I started to create, innovative, sustainable business cases, which I didn't think at it to be so innovative or groundbreaking. It was just, business sense to me at the time. But it was, for instance, setting up companies that took the waste, as we called it back then, from the construction side and made it circular and brought it back, and then, expanding that business to other companies, not only ourselves. It was about, creating buildings that were actually energy positive and not a little bit less bad, but just broke through the 0 point and actually really created value. Made a lot of sense to me. And also the company thrived because of it, because we worked ourselves out of price competitive situations. We got other clients, we got a higher, steeper growth, and so on, and more motivated people, and so on and so forth. And as a result, at a certain point, I was asked to set up the Dutch Sustainable Business Association, which was an overarching association over, I think, 275 companies, small, mid-sized, large, listed, to do the negotiations with governments as to see that we have different policies, because actually, all those laws, regulations, tax systems were holding us back as sustainable entrepreneurs rather than, stimulating us forward. So I worked a lot of years on working to do that, and also set up the Sustainable Science Association alongside. And in that period of time, I felt very privileged to oversee so many, if you will, pieces of the puzzle. I mean, if you run one company, you have one big piece, part of the puzzle, and maybe some surrounding pieces, but you can't oversee, overarching different business sectors and different worlds. So I thought, I'm so privileged. Why don't I not only, write in the newspapers and the magazines and all that, but bring it to a book and compiling my knowledge and my vision. And the reason why I found it so important is because it became my mission to show that business for good is good business, as you just referred to that slogan. Instead of, you can do your business, but becoming sustainable will cost you in whatever shape or form. And that wasn't true at that time. It's not true at this time, and it's definitely not true in the future. So I thought that's my mission, to show that business for good can be good business. For that, I wrote books. And once I phase out of my CEO roles and hand over the realm for that, and started to do non-executive roles, that continued to be my journey and my mission, to demonstrate how that can be done and how we can, go back to the drawing board and invent completely different business models, or improve the current business, but much more sustainable, and have a good business at the same time.
So let me ask you a question. So, I mean, obviously, when I look in your background, I have a couple questions actually, but the first one is, it sounds like you started this coming from a development position, doing like large scale development, and then that even turned into this circular economy type of role with some of the other businesses. Did you always have like an affinity for that, or was it something that just like kind of as you learned about it, you got more interested in it?
I think I always had that. If you look at my upbringing, my father was a business person. My mother was a social worker, so probably some hybrid form, if you will. And my grandfather, he was, very remarkable in the resistance in the war and all that. So I think, I grew up with a sense of responsibility for everything that's around you, both in terms of people as well as in terms of the planet. And my grandfather always taught me, leadership is a privilege, and it comes with a huge amount of responsibility. And that sentence you can still read sometimes in the forewords of my books. And that's just a conviction I have. It's a thing I find really important. And so I think it was natural for me to find my way in business this way.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just so you know, my dad was a business person and my mother was a social worker as well.
Really? So we have that in common then. So then you can relate to that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because my dad's was a my father's Persian. He's from Iran. My mother is American,
Really?
Italian American, but she's a my mother's therapist. My father is a hardcore capitalist. And I actually never put two and two together that there's a lot of, for me, the way it shows up is in like coaching and in trying to like bring out the best in people and leveraging like connecting with them and understanding them, which is my mother's skill set. And then I have this part of me that's like, I call it having sharp teeth, which is like, Be careful, I'll bite your face off. If you're on the wrong side,
Yeah.
if you give me a good reason, like you're gonna like these teeth hurt, you know, and I'm not afraid to bite, and so it's kind of both sides of it. I think there's a
To have both sides. And equally, to have like the IQ and the EQ, if you will. But also, we have to be both tough and empathetic,
yeah.
I think, because we need all those sides in leadership as well as entrepreneurship.
Well, so with that being the case, when you started, you know, and this is, I guess, more of a geographic question, if you will. My sense, and I live in the United States. And I moved. I live in Austin, Texas, and Texas is an interesting place, especially Austin, Texas. It's a very liberal city and a conservative state. I came here from San Francisco, which many people, you may agree or disagree with this, they call it the most European city in the United States, right? So there's an ethos in San Francisco of sustainability and of, you know, conscious capitalism and being forward thinking and protecting the planet, and, you know, this perspective that I do not believe is shared by most of the United States. I think that in the United States there's even a culture war around some of this stuff, but I feel like in Europe it's much more accepted that we should be doing these types of things you're talking about. I'm not talking about conscious capitalism as much as I am talking about environmental protection and having a perspective around environmentalism. Did you feel like that? I mean, have you noticed that, or what is your perspective on how that is, I guess, approached from a European standpoint as opposed to maybe other parts of the world?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple of layers. So I'm from the Netherlands, which is a small country. Nobody else speaks Dutch, we are a trade country. We were used to, go over the world because the country is very small. So we're very orientated or orientation is outside the country. I think that helps because you have naturally a curious mindset to other places in the world. And you're used to adapting yourself, not only in terms of language, but also in terms of the wider culture, to adapt yourself to be able to work with all kinds of people around the globe. That is in its concept something Dutch, and it's something that I personally have very strong. Then in terms of Europe, yes, I think it has been very forward looking if you compare to other parts of the world. But equally, I think it's important to acknowledge every geography in the world for its characteristics. And to give you an example, the other day I was talking to an American bank, and we were talking about, how do things go in terms of ESG in the States as opposed to Europe. And then I made a joke, but everybody was really enjoying that joke. Because I said, on the one hand, in Europe, we have a lot of regulation, laws, new obligations that all come out of Brussels to be imposed on business and the financial sector, which is great. But it's a backdoor. It's as to ensure that nobody does things wrong and that a certain movement is being stimulated. But I see it as a backdoor. But it's not a front door. And if I look at the US, for instance, they would ask the question, okay, great, all these new regulations and every rules and disclosure and reporting and all that is being, meant to push business forward. But where are the deals? The US is much better in saying, okay, we have this ESG, but what deals are we going to make because of it? So the business part is stronger in the US. The Europe is much more orientated towards getting that back door closed. And the US, in a way, is more about the front door. And we need the combination of both.
Yeah, I think
Europe and US, of course, we have different parts of the world with even other characteristics.
Yeah, I think that there's a healthy tension around commercialization of the world, and but there being this responsibility. And so we talked about this before the show. I'm a trained conscious capitalism. This idea of doing great while doing good, right? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, which is like, hey, like business can be a force for good, right?
Absolutely.
And if we I'm like a financial person, right? Like I studied accounting in college, but like I love numbers because they, kind of binary. And so I actually look at this from a liability and asset perspective. And I look at it from an income statement. And the way I describe it to people sometimes is I'll say, look, I'll use an example of if I'm drilling for oil. If I'm drilling for oil and I hit a spot where I can pull oil out of the ground, that is an asset. I'm creating a revenue potentially, assuming, and I'll get to like if I don't do it well, if I do it effectively, efficiently, if I don't spill any oil, and if the regulation says if I do spill oil, there's an actual expense that's been allocated at that moment, right? Because someone's paying for that at some point, somewhere, at some time.
Some point in time, yeah.
And my belief as a conscious capitalism is that when you believe in like stakeholder theory, is that when that drop of oil hits the water, there's an expense that you need to recognize because someone's going to pay for it. And that I believe that when we purely just look at this from a capitalistic perspective and we'll use the example of a big oil spill that no one does anything about, then you're essentially letting people have an expense and not pay for that expense. And that when we start thinking about, well, how does that affect the environment? What downstream effect does that have? That we are either recognizing the liability that's being created or we're not. And I just think it's a more like honest and holistic view to say, like, when that happens, who's paying that expense? And if I'm reaping the reward from an income and asset perspective, that I can't ignore the liability and the expense. What do you think about that?
Well, you touched when you were talking upon what we now still call, unfortunately, externalities. So those are all the costs that are related to taking things from the earth that, of course, have a value. Otherwise, nobody would take them out. But then taking them out is for free, which is actually a crazy concept. And then all the pollution is also more or less for free. But, the price comes to someone sometime, somewhere. And I'm a part of the Global Business Commission, and we calculated a while ago because we wanted to know, how can we actually compare in an honest way sustainable and non-sustainable business cases? So those that don't, use virgin materials and pollute, no social harm done either, or those that do, by making it very factual, monetize it, as you just discussed, by putting the externalities into the price. And guess what? The average sustainable business case improved in terms of value by more or less 40%. And in case, for instance, food waste, which is, externalities for nothing, because in the end it's not even consumed, it's waste, came to around 85% improvement. So it is like, if you talk about conscious capitalism and you relate that to how businesses operate, and this is something I worked on a lot when I worked with the government on this very topic, it's like playing a new game with old rules. The new game being, sustainable capitalism, sustainable business and entrepreneurship, but with rules that actually point into the other direction, which favor the old game and not the new game. I mean, if you only think about that, this year we hit the jackpot with the amount of subsidizing on fossil fuel, 7 trillion in a year, 7 trillion. You know what that amount of money stands for? Twice the amount of additional investment we would have to do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. Twice that amount is being put in fossil fuel subsidies. So it's a new game, but old rules, including what we price and what we favor. So it's a system change in the end, what we have to achieve. But business holds the key to solutions here, although we need all stakeholders and we need, of course, governance to work with us on this.
So governments tend to be slow, right? At least in the States, I noticed that, and they tend to be fragmented, and kind of leveraging. What just came to mind when you were just talking, when I'm like, okay, look, the government, and at least from my perspective in the United States, is it's fragmented and they move very slowly. It's very, very slowly here, and they're not very forward thinking, and they take very, very minimal risk at all. And so you have that as the underpinning of change. You have a game that, to your point, has new game, old rules. And so you have incumbents who have zero incentive to play by the new rules based off of everything we're talking about. How do you see, and I actually think that tech kind of unlocks the key to this because it forces disruption, right? Whether people like it or not. But, and maybe that's the answer. But my question for you is like, how do you disrupt that game? Because the powers that be are moving too slow. The powers that, from a governmental standpoint, from a business standpoint, there's like, you show me someone's incentives, I'll show you the behavior, and the incentives are to not change because it affects the bottom line. Yet, if we want to be forward thinking and really move towards what is necessary for the future in probably every capacity, we need to change how we play the game. How do you answer that?
Well, there's no simple answer to that, obviously, Darius, because otherwise it would happen already. But I do think that, we all matter. So what we do as an individual and as a company and as business collectively can achieve a lot more than we tend to think. Let me give you an example. We're just on the threshold to COP28 in Dubai. And then the other day I saw this letter from CEOs. I mean, I'm a bit fed up with all the... So let me give you an example. We're just on the threshold to COP28, the climate convention, this time in Dubai. And then the other day, I think 100 CEOs wrote a letter. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a bit fed up with all the pledges because we don't want greenwashing and greenwashing, but we want real action. Nevertheless, that was this letter of 100 CEOs. And they wrote together, we are all doing it well, and we are, compliant with Paris in 2030 and 50, but we need governments to do a lot of things, being point A, B, C, D. Then I think to myself, it all sounds good at first sight. You think, oh, well, those points made sense. But then I think, no. If you're with 100 CEOs, and imagine in the world of the 100 largest economies by revenue, actually 69 of those 100 are companies. So imagine the power of business, It's immense. Why not say with 100 CEOs, governments, we will step up. We will jointly create a fund, or we will step up and accelerate and do this or that. And then we expect of you ABC. This is a normal way of doing business, but it's much better than just pledging, oh, we're doing fine, and governments, you have to do more. Why not use your power to negotiate some progress out of it? So that's not only lacking in governances, but equally with CEOs themselves.
And do you think that, like, when you start thinking of, and I think leadership is key here, but when you start thinking of the weight, like, the actual weight of the status quo, we have this weight that's kind of like, well, this is just how we do it. And you have this progressive way of doing it that changes things, costs me more money. Yeah, maybe it helps the environment. I'll debate that with my own scientists, right? And so you have, that's why I say a weight that's weighing it down, saying, yeah, we don't. I mean, even like the Paris Accords. I mean, like here in the United States, it's amazing that people fight it, right? The each administration topsy-turvy over it.
Yeah,
but
I
the
know.
reality, yeah, and it's challenging, right? Especially if you're a person that struggles with people that ignore scientific data, which I happen to.
Yeah.
Usually these folks don't even understand what the scientific process is, right? To understand what they're arguing, right? So there's an ignorance that seems to kind of pervade, right? We have a lot of that happening in pockets throughout the world. But my belief is, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, is that the only way we overcome this is through stronger leadership, enrolling more leaders in these types of ideology, giving them data to support them, helping know that this will create more, I believe, more profit, and I believe you believe more profit. But how do you get people there? How do we get more leaders in those camps? Because that's the only way we're going to make this change. How do you think of that?
It's all about leadership. So developing that leadership and recognizing the people that have not only the talent and the competencies, but also the ideology and the motivation to do what's right, to grow, because in the end of the day, it's people that change eras, and not institutions or organizations. Huh? It's all about the people. So I am, besides being on boards and writing books and doing speeches about it, I'm also part of a global company which is called Chair Mentors International, and we mentor future CEOs. And we do that for the reason that we want them to grow in terms of resilience, knowledge, but we only grow the people that we feel are really future leaders, meaning that they're conscious, sustainable leaders. So that's my way to help with it. And we do that with 85 chairmen around the world, actually. And we do it for large companies mainly, to really develop those leaders and make them strong, resilient, to keep the courage, to have the endurance, because these things take long. It's not easy done. Your average sustainable idea on one day takes 7 years before it actually hits the markets. So it takes time. And that's what we need to do. We need to grow those leaders, and we have to set examples. What I do in my books and in my speeches is to add real life business cases. And I do that for a reason, because, it's all great to hear all kinds of theories, assumptions, opinions, but people need stories of things that actually happen, so they can see, oh yeah, that company really did it. When I talk about, for instance, Interface, that they have these projects, climate take back, where they actually use the carbon from the air and put it as a resource in their carpets, and that way of thinking of positive impact, then people start to feel empowered. Oh, it actually happens. It's companies that are doing that. Hey, I can see the numbers. That company's doing well. Hey, actually, that company is growing faster than peers that are way less ambitious in terms of sustainability. And that is the proof that people need. If we talk about investments, you talked to me earlier, Darius, and saying, I'm now in private equity, or you're planning to do that. I have worked in my board roles a lot in the financial sector, both at big banks or, private equity funds and the likes. And I like that because, I have such great proof points. And you can really show that the funds where you pushed out, via exclusion criteria, what you don't want to invest in anymore, and you choose what you do want to invest, and you don't get a lower return. You just don't.
It's interesting you just said that, because I'll use even my organization. We're raising a pretty large sum of money right now to invest in wealth management firms. So our clients that we're trying to buy are wealth management, or portfolio companies or wealth management firms. We're trying to buy minority stakes. But one of the things that we look for, which I think you'll appreciate, is we call it WAC, willingness, ability, and capacity. And what is the willingness? Does the leader of the organization exhibit a learner mentality? Are they open to learning? And for us, if they don't have that, if they don't exhibit that openness to learning, we will not write a check. So I do think that and I think that private equity is, again, if we live in a world, and I want to get here because your new book is a lot around tech. I believe that we live in a world that's, and I don't care. It doesn't even matter what I believe. The facts are, we live in a world that's changing faster than it's ever changed before. Right.
Absolutely. And more dimensional.
Right. And so that's number one. Number two, and I think one of the reasons why that's happening is because of what I'm about to say, is that it's never been so easy for people to start businesses. There's so much access to information, tools, technology is deflationary in nature. I mean, I'm 45 years old. I started, my first real company when I was 25 years old, and it cost me $30,000 just to set my office up. Yeah, I can set up an office right now for $500, maybe even less.
No threshold anymore.
Right. So the threshold, the barrier to entry to starting a business has never been lower. The funding for businesses has never been wider, even though maybe tech's not getting capital like it did 3 years ago. It's still, there's more avenues, incubators, venture capital funds, private equity funds. All these third-party capital providers have never been more prevalent than they are today. And I think that all creates an environment of competitiveness for alpha, competitiveness for returns on investment. And so when you start to look for stuff like I'm talking about, maybe like what you're talking about, qualitative differences. And in conscious capitalism, we say that as goes the leadership, goes the organization. I look at that and say, well, I want to find the most open-minded, capable of learning leader to give my money to. Do you think that in of itself lends way to creating this environment, like almost organically? And I didn't even think about it until I just said it, where the future leaders that get the predominance of capital will be the most open-minded, willing to learn leaders who then drive the change commercially in the world.
Yeah, well, if I were an investor, I would select on openness and willingness to learn as well, because, it's the best predictor that they will adapt to, rapidly changing environments, which is the case. We have actually investigated the relationship between sustainability and innovation. And it's a chicken and an egg, The more sustainable a company is, the more innovative it is, because it has to be, and the other way around. The more innovative a company is, it tends to be more sustainable. So they both go hand in hand. And it's absolutely crucial. I see, so many young companies that start with the purpose. And I think that is great and amazing, and those companies should scale up much more, because if a company starts with the purpose, and tied to that is the whole way of thinking around moonshots, to have the courage to start your thinking with, hey, what's wrong in this world? What needs fixing? What needs to be solved? And then reasoning back to, what can I bring as a business as a solution? And guess what? Those markets, and as I called it in my books, the sustainable development growth markets, with solutions to what we desperately need in the world, those growth markets tend to, at least have 1.5 times faster growth opportunities than any other. And it makes sense, because these markets open up and the old ones are going to phase down. There's no other way. There's a discussion of when, not if. So, all those new companies and entrepreneurs and leaders that really tie into that can achieve so much more.
Do you think that market dynamics will, when we start thinking, and we were talking about earlier about how do we get more leaders to want to do this? And again, this is me just ideating, but I'm like, there's a saying on Wall Street, which is you don't want to stand in front of a moving train, right? And the market's the moving train. And a part of me wants to believe that the velocity of change in the business world is the train that will require the types of leaders that will need to be the types of leaders to create the change. The market itself will require that in order to even be competitive. And so, do you think that there's a possibility that even amongst our best high-level interests of, creating an ethos around doing good business, that the market itself will just demand that you be willing to be on that cutting edge and be a leader that can drive that, and then those types of leaders will just end up there organically, without even the yes, we can try to force it, but it doesn't matter what we force. The market will demand it in of itself.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that's true. But equally, there is no real free market currently. I just touched upon the point that we subsidize fossil fuels with 7 trillion this year. So we influence those markets.
Right.
And we influence them in a more heavy way in the old game than we do in the new game. Take that all out. Imagine we don't subsidize anything anymore, because we always talk about subsidizing, electric cars and all that, but just super minor if you compare it to the other side, only that's not being debated, at least not very often. Take that all out, and then there's a real free market, but that's not the case. Internalize all the externalities, everything that comes with the price, but it ends up in some shape or form at the taxpayer, because nobody's going to pay for it, and definitely not the companies that cause it. Restore all that, price everything, and then it's a fair market. So there's a lot of shortcomings. And if you talk about conscious capitalism, in my definition, you have to bring all those aspects in. And have you done that, then there's a fair system. There's a new game with new rules, and then it will fly by itself. But now we're holding that train back. You talk about people that are, able to jump on the train. I think that's what you meant. But now we have a zillion people holding the train back. Remove them,
Right.
and then the train can drive, and then it goes by itself. But then we have to do a lot of changes to do that first. And to my point, when I said, all these CEOs wrote that letter, I was like, guys, girls, if you want that train to ride, you have to push it and jump in it, but not stand by the sideline. That's not going to help.
So let's talk about that, because I think that there's a weight around the incumbents that are going to fight tooth and nail. Like, if I'm getting $7 trillion of subsidies, I'm not going to let you take those away from me. Like I'll do everything in my power to stop you from that. And
believe me.
Say that again.
I said, and that's being done. Believe me. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know the concrete numbers, but the whole lobbying, and especially in the US, I'm sorry to say, the lobbyists of the big firms is huge. There's a lot of money.
So again, you show me your incentives, I'll show you your behavior, right? Let's talk about so there has to be a force that can get in the way, regardless of the incumbents, regardless of the powers that be. And, I believe that tech has shown its ability to do that, right? So let's talk about that. You have the new book, Tech for Good. Imagine solving the world's greatest challenges. Talk about how you believe tech, if we have all these people pulling the train back, the $7 trillion of subsidies for, carbon, for fossil fuels, like, that's just one example, but there's probably another 1,000 examples.
Oh yeah, that's a lot.
There's a lot of people that have a lot of reason to let this be a problem for the next generation when they're nothing but dirt in the ground. And so, how does tech change that? Let's talk about the book and your beliefs on how tech can actually, move the needle in the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. Well, tech in itself is neutral, huh? It gets meaning by humans. So it depends on how we apply it. Tech in itself is not going to come around and do exactly what it's supposed to do in terms of doing good. But coming out of the third industrial revolution and just tiptoeing over the fourth industrial revolution means that now all of a sudden we have this wealth of a wide range of technologies, both physical and digital, that blend, and that create huge opportunities for sustainable progress if we apply it as such. And I think that, having learned from the consequences of former industrial revolutions, yes, it brought progress to people, but it also came with a huge price to the world, and a price we actually cannot afford to pay. Now we have not only the opportunity, but also the responsibility to choose wisely. How are we going to use tech moving forward? Is it to further deploy the planet and people? Is it for fun? Or is it to do something really good? Now, these technologies, and in my book I describe 8 groups of those technologies, because it's much more complicated than in the past. You have blockchain, AI, robotics, drones, autonomous vehicles, augmented reality, and so on and so forth. But it's like a huge toolkit for the planet, you could say. If we choose to apply those technologies for good, meaning that, for instance, we can get to places in the world to bring seeds and medicines where we don't even have to build the infrastructure anymore because drones can do the job, where we can have mini robots and other robots help to do surgery, also in remote areas of the world, where we can have AI, create data so that we can prevent harvest loss, and so on and so forth. There's a zillion examples. If we do that, we can accelerate our progress on these sustainable development goals, which I like to refer to, in a way that we couldn't before. So it's positive, we can accelerate our progress. It's also very much needed, because imagine if we don't do that, we'll definitely not achieve to mitigate climate change and all these other challenges we have. So we cannot do it without technology. And I think it's super important, because technology has such power, for bad or for good, that we choose to apply it for good jointly, and that we really make an effort as business, but also in governance governments and also scientists to direct it that way. And that was my reason to write this book, to show to people how big a force for good it can be, how wide the variety of technologies is available, how every business sector can apply that for good, because there's 75 business cases in the book. And also that we need to do that. And through doing that, in the process, restore the trust in technology, which is, because it's been applied for bad so often and to such high scale, is being restored. I mean, trust in technology is at an all-time low now.
What do you well, I have two questions for you. So I'm going to ask you the question based on what you just said, and then I have a bigger question based on the book. So the first question is trust in technology is an all-time low. It also feels like trust in governments at an all-time low. You know, there's trust between, you know, communities seems low depending on the community. And so is this a more macro issue of just the state of the world is less trusting now because of a lot of the, like, it's almost like we're at this 80 years past World War II. There was a rebuilding of the world. Ray Dalio talks about this in his world, The Changing World Order, that the world goes in these 80 to 120 year cycles. Do you feel like maybe that's part of it as well?
It's a logical consequence, I think, of short-termism. You know, if everything's short-term, and that was, of course, a trade of, you know, the shareholder orientation of companies, for instance, and the whole capitalistic system is all very short-term. Trust comes with long-term. And in the sense, when you address global challenges, you're automatically long-term orientated. So that helps restore trust. So yes, it's a thing that is broader. But it comes into play very much if you talk about technology. And that's a topic that's now hugely necessary and important. So that's why I zoom in on that. But it is a broader topic.
And so going back to, you talked about your book covers 8 different areas of technology. Do you mind going through, like, naming what those are?
Yeah, so it's artificial intelligence and data, drones, 3D printing, it's augmented reality, you know, in different stages and forms, autonomous vehicles, it's blockchain, and then probably I forget one, but it's 8 different groups. It's not 8 technologies, but it's groups of technologies, because within those groups you have a wide range of variations. And in the book, I describe these because often, you know, if I talk to CEOs or boards, either executive or non-executive, they have very little knowledge about it, but everybody's kind of afraid to say so.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be good to just, and then the same maybe apply to myself, you know, before I did this book. You know, what is this technology actually exactly for? How do we really use blockchain, for instance? And what does it mean? And how can it be applied for good? So there's quite a accessible way in the book of explaining the technology and the economics that go along with it. And then it touches upon in which segments can you imagine that's being applied for good, and then gives a lot of examples how that is being done by businesses.
So, you know, it was interesting what you just said before, though, as you were naming off the technologies. And I'm like, I always joke that I'm an inch deep and a mile wide. So I kind of know a little bit about enough stuff where I can kind of piece things together. When I look at those technology sets, for the most part, not all of them, but many of them, they're around, you know, and this is probably a obvious statement. Like, technologies, when I think of technology, it's like we take something and we make it faster and easier. Take a good process and make it faster and easier, right? Take a tool and make it do more with less, right? So there's this, again, this natural deflationary component of technology where you can do more with less, more productivity. And so when I look at that, I think, great, we would call that progress. And I think probably for the last, I don't know, let's call it, you know, 50 to 80 years, you've had a ton of inefficiencies in the world that technology has been able to go inside of and remove the fat, remove the inefficiency, and there's value creation when that happens, right? And maybe one could argue that'll always be an efficient use case, that there's always going to be inefficiencies that technology can remove from the system. But I also think that there's this perspective, at least I have a perspective, that that we're leveraging technology to overcome the shortcomings of humans, right? The shortcomings of the humans, of a human hand, of a human thought, of a human. It's augmenting human behavior, right? Augmenting human productivity. And so there comes to a point, though, where you could actually have a negative reaction to that, because if technology is taking over everything, then what do the humans do, right? And so I guess it's a long-winded way of me saying, are we hitting a point in time, and this is when we're talking about technology being dangerous, where in the past it was just to speed up a good process and you would get value creation out of it, to now it's where, well, I don't need humans, I can just have technology do everything, but yet we still have 7.8 billion people here that need to do something. How do you overcome that when we think about technology being the source of good?
Yeah, well, I think by definition, we shouldn't fear things, but we should face things. Because with fearing, things don't disappear. 25% of the professions will be impacted by technology now. And as you said, it's transformational technology. And it will mean that AI is going to take over some part and that humans have to do other things. I mean, there's certain things humans per definition are really good at, and there's certain things that technology can do much better when humans are less good at. So that's going to be a new interaction between humans and technology for sure. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because the amount of jobs that will be there, let's say after this industrial revolution, is larger than prior. So the need for jobs in terms of types of roles and quantitative is bigger than before. So there's no quantitative fear needed. But of course, it all comes down to, are we going to anticipate? Are we going to train people for the professions we need in the future? Or can we continue to educate for the past? To give you a very simple example, we want this shift to renewable energy, so we're putting wind parks everywhere, but now we desperately lack people that are able to maintain them, because we didn't anticipate that. So it's about that, it's about anticipating, about making sure to train people to have an eye on what professions are needed in the future, base our education system on that, and make sure that we all get through the shift. That's the only way to do it.
And so I appreciate that. And I think that probably, to your point, new solutions create new problems to solve, right? And I think
Exactly.
that having faith in the fact that in a world of growing complexity that's changing faster, you're creating new problem sets that need solving, and we are the solvers. I guess assuming that AI does not become sentient and solve its own problems, right? Which it probably could to a certain degree. But I guess time will tell on that. So when you start thinking of who this book was written for, and you mentioned it earlier, but if I was to say, hey, Marga, who needs to read this book so that they can be more prepared for the business world we're walking into? Who's your ideal reader, and why should they be reading this book?
In a way, it's similar to the $1 trillion shift. And I noticed when I made that book, I first said I focus it on higher business people, professionals, CEOs, entrepreneurs, business school students, and so on. And then later I found out that actually the book, which became a bestseller, had a much more broader audience, because it's accessible and it's a bit of a browse book. You can read the parts that are really important to you. And I think the same applies to Tech for Good. So everybody that's interested in how do we change for the better with the help of technology is a potential reader. It's an accessible book. It's an inspirational book. If you know a lot about technology already, it's still an interesting book, because then it, focuses on, but how do we use those technologies for good? And how does that look like? If you know a lot about sustainability and less about technology, is very interesting, because it talks about sustainability, but how does technology come into play? So it's a wide audience, and I've noticed that for my former book as well. It's interesting, Darius, if you write such a book, which takes 3 years, my books tend to take 3 years, because I want thorough studies done, I want research done, I want case studies in. It's not, like your novelist kind of business book. And then after you've written it, for me as an author comes the most interesting moment, because then you think, okay, what did I actually want to achieve? What is lying behind all the content, or what is overarching all the content? And that made me add 1 page per chapter. And that page is called Imagine It. That's how the subtitle came about, because I thought there's so much doom and gloom in the world. There's so many people desperate. People lose hope. I want this book also to be a positive book and to, maybe even be a book of hope. And that's why I called it Imagine Technology for Good, Solving the World's Greatest Challenges. And each chapter starts with a page about imagining. I want people to find the courage to imagine what is possible and not dwell only on what is not possible. If you imagine that we can restore our coral reefs that otherwise would disappear without a decade by 90%, that we can restore them by 3D printing, which is so good that the animal ecosystem doesn't recognize it as artificial, and so also the wildlife is being restored, that we have such great technologies that we can bring seeds, medicines to remote areas, that we can, help people in surgeries, that we can prevent harvest loss and all that. And you imagine what we can do, then hopefully people find way more courage to actually do it.
I love that. I'm so excited for this book. So before we tell everyone where they can get the book, which is, I'm going to give you the title for the audience. So, and we'll put this all in the show notes. It's The Tech for Good, Imagine Solving the World's Greatest Challenges. We're going to do the greatness question, but before we do that, why don't you tell everyone where they can get the book? It's coming out November 29th. If folks that are interested in getting a copy of the book or they want to connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do that? And then we'll do the greatness question right after.
Well, to connect with me, it's easy through my website, which is simply my name, margahoek.com. There you can find the book and you can find the button where to order it. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of my thought leadership on LinkedIn in newsletters, so subscribe to my newsletter and follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and definitely have a look at the website. I share a lot of content there.
Fantastic. And so we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. So listeners, you can check it out. We'll put all the links in the show notes. We always like to do that, and we'll be sure to actually promote this during your book launch on the 29th. With that said, though, I wanted to go to the greatness question. So what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
I think inner fear and insecurity is, in the end, the greatest barrier. You have to have the courage to do what you believe in. Often that means, having an ambition or setting an objective as a CEO or in any other kind of leadership role. And at the point that you have the ambition, you have actually no clue how to achieve it. So dealing with insecurity and fear is something you learn through life. And if you overcome that, if you don't let that hold you back, you can do great things. I think that's the most important thing.
I love that. Marga, so much gratitude from here at the Greatness Machine. I'm so excited for this book. For all the
pleasure to talk with you, Darius. I love the conversation.
I did as well. Audience, go support Marga and her book. Check her out on social media. We'll put all that in the show notes. Until next time, peace out. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.